Hey everybody, good news. My Pixel 6 phone is working. Ordered a new battery. I won't go into just the absurdity of the battery replacement kit that I got, but my brother was able to help me out with it and he got the new battery installed and the new phone is working. I'm shooting this video on, I'd say, the new phone. I mean, I've had it for a couple of years, but it's newer than the one I've been using. But the one I've been using, the Huawei Mate SE, I think I'm going to leave my SIM card in this and keep using this as my phone and just use the Pixel as a device for making videos, basically. So last time I posted a video, it was a quick one, a shot in the parking garage of a hospital in Springdale, Arkansas. And I just outlined the two types of, or the two definitions of leftist that I use interchangeably. Sometimes they're overlapping, sometimes not. So you've got people who favor, traditionally left-leaning policies. So if somebody's talking about universal basic income or universal health care, increased union representation, these sorts of things, these are, pretty clearly leftist. But then, as Theodore Kaczynski described in his manifesto from the 90s, Industrial Society and Its Future, leftist, he uses leftist as a moniker to represent a certain type of psychology. And he says, he's careful in the manifesto to say, not everybody who favors leftist policies is a leftist of the psychological type, and not everybody who is a leftist of the psychological type is consistent in their advocacy of leftist policies. In different times and places, basically the leftist is somebody who wants to use institutional power to bully people that they disagree with and to basically cut down people who have demonstrated executive function and strength of will and character and made something of themselves. So, those two kind of overlap, and sometimes the leftist of the psychological type favors right-wing policies, if that's what they can use to virtue signal and to browbeat and bully people. But in the current context, leftist policies are the way to go if you want a virtue signal. And this is particularly true. I mean, I haven't mentioned environmentalism, but Kaczynski was the ultimate environmentalist, but he couldn't stand, most environmental activists because he thought they were leftists. And he said that the last thing you can afford in your anti-tech revolutionary cell is a leftist because they'll just ruin it. So I'm going to read some feedback that I got from various folks to that video, and I might not get through all of it. If I don't read yours, I'm sorry. And I'm taking them in basically reverse chronological order, which is how they're displayed to me. So Duncan writes, I've felt politically homeless for years. I was attracted to skinhead music and culture as a kid, but had no interest in the politics of it. As I got into my 20s, I got political. It was the days of Occupy Wall Street and anti-Iraq war protests, and growing up with fairly left-wing parents, I tended to sort of centrist left. My father used to complain tongue-in-cheek about me being too conservative, LOL. As I've hit my early 40s, damn, it goes fast, doesn't it? As a man in his mid-50s, yes it does. I find the kind of leftists that I see on social media, old friends, and even some of my family, as much as I love them, I find the virtue signaling tiresome. They be more accepting of diversity, while they look down their noses at rednecks and bogans, a word I imagine you know from your time in Australia. I don't think I ever heard that when I was in Australia, but I lived in Australia in 2002 and 2003, different time. I know the word was used, but I was a tourist. I mean, I lived there, I had an apartment, I owned a car, but I didn't have deep roots there, and I think a lot of my social interactions were pretty surface level. Duncan continues, people who are working class people who are, and this is the definition of bogan, people who are working class, people who are, like other minority groups, actively discriminated against, but because we're white, we get treated like we're the problem. White privilege, hell yeah, there's white privilege, but it's sure as hell not the white working poor who are enjoying it. As I've gotten older, I find I get along better on a superficial level with people whose politics are not mine. To be honest, I met guys through my powerlifting gym who are straight up WP. And yet, some of the hardest working, most honest, and most caring family men, good fathers and husbands, good friends. not what the left had led me to believe. Now, to be frank, I've been accused of many things by the online left in Facebook groups: fascist, anti-Semite, toxic masculinity, followed by being banned. And for what it's worth, I don't believe any of that is about me. I feel like my position has changed over the years, but it's much more about the left leaving me. So I don't have a whole lot to say to that other than, yeah, I feel you. I mean, you grew up, you came to young adulthood around the Occupy Wall Street time. That seems like yesterday to me. I mean, I was at Zuccotti Park. I'd never slept there. I wasn't like camped out there full time. I was a tourist there as well. But yeah, I was definitely enthusiastic about it. I thought change was in the air, and you know, I didn't fully agree with Kaczynski's view of the left at that time. I certainly do now. So speaking of leftists, I said, you know, there's two types. There's those who favor leftist political policies, and then there are those who like to use leftist positions to beat up and coerce other people. Usually psychologically beat up, socially beat up, not necessarily physically assault, although that it happens on occasion, but it's typically, I would say, not leftists of the psychological type that are committing acts of violence, as that requires a certain level of physical confidence and aggression that, you know, that they tend to go for the passive aggressive. But Anani Moose writes, as far as I'm concerned, there's really only one type, just different degrees of evil. To which I said, I recommend MDMA. And Anani Moose responds, weird suggestion, but I'd rather have a clear head. Well, Anani Moose, I don't think you have a clear head now. I think that you are seeing the world through the lens of a totalizing ideology, which leads you to denounce millions of people with whom you have never interacted as evil. Now, evil is such a dangerous concept because evil is fundamental. You know, it's not circumstantial. It's not something that, you know, you can understand and forgive because of circumstance. Evil is just evil. You can't compromise with it. You can't, all you can do is either run away or somehow survive it, or, you know, if you're really motivated, go out and do battle with it and defeat it utterly. I mean, you can't accept its surrender either. It's got to be a battle to the death if it's evil, because if you let evil, you know, slink off to lick its wounds, it will come back at you later. So if you're going to call somebody evil, particularly somebody you don't know, you've never met, you have no interaction with them, but you're convinced that they're evil, that's not a clear head talking. So I'll just stop there. Frank writes, when I was growing up, Reagan was president and Christian conservatives were prominent in the media and positions of power. So here I'll say it sounds like Frank's about my age, because, yeah, I graduated high school in 1986. Frank continues, I was turned off by their moral hectoring at home and warmongering abroad. The Democrats seemed like a party of common sense, personal freedom, and concern for the working class. It was really stunning to witness the complete reversal of this order over the last 5 to 10 years. Kaczynski tuned into it earlier than you did, so I think it's been going on longer than that, but yeah, it's gotten really, really obvious in the last decade. It's also amazing how few people seem to realize this shift, but I suspect it has more to do with the party in charge getting high on its own authority more than anything else. Well, I think offline, most people appreciate the shift. I think that the people who, particularly the people I know, you know, they tend to be the two online types. That's, you know, I'm certainly the pot calling the kettle black there. But normal people, I think, you know, that I talk to out in the world, they don't mouth woke platitudes or challenge me with, you know, their shibboleths. Now, I'm in Arkansas, but even when I was in, you know, uber woke Vermont, most people, as far as I could tell, weren't all that political. You know, and a lot of the ones who were mouthing the woke platitudes were either young kids, you know, who were just looking around trying to form a coherent worldview, or the go along to get along sort of pragmatists, and then, yeah, a few leftists of the psychological type who were, you know, doing it to get high. Parker writes, I'm reminded of something I read in the Oliver Sacks book, A Leg to Stand On. After injuring himself on a mountain climb/hike, he documents his experience as a patient when his whole career was as a doctor. Anyway, after he leaves the hospital and goes to another place to convalesce, he describes walking out and seeing some teens playing football. He describes the boiling up of resentment of their health, resentment of their youth. He struggles within himself with these feelings and thoughts. That type of seed of bitter jealousy, when metastasized, can power a political movement, I guess. On the intergenerational stage, I see the posture of countries this way, resentful and bitter at the West, in quotes. And it's weird because, you know, a lot of the people, I would say the most vocal advocates of this shaming of the West, you know, for its strength and success, although they would say for its evil imperialism, sobers up in the morning and deletes them. At least that's been my experience. You know, my personal interactions with her on Twitter seem to fit that pattern. Advait C, sorry, your handle just doesn't roll off the tongue, but says, just curious, are you familiar with the principles and applications of MMT, or modern monetary theory? For me, it's remarkable that politicians still talk from the false myth that national taxes pay for national spending, when that is not the case. And remarkable that some, many, leftists don't embrace MMT as a logical and easy way to pay for all the great social programs that could uplift society. I've done a lot of learning on MMT, and it's opened my eyes to how national currencies really work. Thanks for all your great content. Cheers and best wishes. So this is not a whole video devoted to MMT because I've responded to several pieces of feedback here already. So this is just one segment, and if you have feedback, I can maybe do a whole video on the topic. But the sort of common sense notion of how governments raise and spend money is that, you know, a government is like a family household with a breadwinner who goes to a job and works, and they get a paycheck, and then they take the paycheck and they go spend it at the store, pay their utilities, pay their taxes, all that good stuff. The paycheck that the government gets is the taxes that it collects from the people. So it's very intuitive, it's understandable, it's relatable, and yeah, it's false. That's just not how it works. The government raises money or creates money, basically, by issuing new debt. You know, there are treasury bonds that the treasury issues and sells to investors, typically. You know, a lot of them are American citizens and companies, but a lot of that, you know, those bonds are held by foreign powers, including China. China owns a lot of U.S. debt. And then the United States agrees to, you know, pay the debt holders their principal, in theory, in the long run. But in the short term, they pay interest on that debt, or we pay interest on that debt. Now, the MMT theory people say that, look, the United States, it has its own currency. It's a fiat currency. It can create it out of thin air. It can just create all the money it needs for all the spending that it wants to do, and just create new money. And it doesn't have to do it via the creation of debt. You can just do it by printing money. You know, just crank up the presses and have a lot more money out in the world. Well, the more money you put into circulation, the less it's worth. So you get inflation. And if you crank up the presses and just leave them running, you get hyperinflation. There's a lot you can say just on the topic of hyperinflation, and it typically doesn't happen organically. It's usually, you know, the best instances of it that we know have happened when some outside power is, is making things worse deliberately in order to basically conduct a monetary assault on a country. But here's the problem with MMT as I see it. The idea is that you put as much new money into the system as you need to pay for all the programs that you want. And then to fight inflation, or to prevent inflation, or at least keep it under control, you claw back some of that money supply via taxation. So, you know, you issue a bunch of new money, you use it on social programs, you spend it, and then, you know, to prevent inflation, you tax the citizenry, and hopefully tax corporations and oligarch class citizens as well, and take that money back and basically destroy it. You know, when you tax it out of the economy, you're destroying it. You're limiting the money supply again to control inflation. The problem is this, though. Most people are broke. So the only people you can really tax to to bring down the money supply are the wealthy, and the wealthy won't pay the taxes. and the government won't issue new taxes on the wealthy. It's been going the other way for decades now. So until you defeat the capture of the government by the wealthy, you can't implement MMT without hyperinflation, or at least without, rampant, serious inflation, which hurts working people and low-income people the most. And if you do solve that problem, your fiscal and your monetary woes are half solved already. You don't really have to embark on some, new esoteric theory about money creation, spending, taxation, national sovereignty, and all that good stuff. And another big problem with MMT is that most people don't understand it, and they won't understand it. It's not intuitive. It doesn't match their understanding of the world. So basically what you have to say in order to sell MMT is, hey, I'm a technocrat. I've studied this stuff. I know better than you. Trust me. Yeah, which is, in good times, you don't even have to make that argument. In good times, people just naturally trust, systems of authority, institution, technocrats. It's not an issue. And when times are tough, they don't trust. And if you're selling something really weird and wonky and bizarre like MMT, no. Most people will have nothing to do with it. So, it would be cool if you could use MMT to fund a universal basic income. Give everybody $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year. Subsistence level living is what that is. It's more than I make, but it's subsistence level living. You can't tax that money back from those people. They're going to spend all of it. They're going to spend all of it. As soon as they get it, it's gone. You can't tax that back. So you're just going to have ever increasing amounts of money in the system, which means inflation. So, you've studied this more than I have. You surely have a response. So go ahead and post it. And I'll respond to your response. All right, DHU 1919 writes, V.I. Lenin wrote, "Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism," close quote, during World War I, and argued the empires of his day went to war to accelerate capitalist aims. Though some Marxists today would say Lenin was a rightist deviation of socialist thought at the time with the Vanguard Party concept. When you get into, Marxist jargon, I don't follow it so well. War certainly is the health of the state. I say it is the health of any state. Capitalist, communist, purple hattist, whatever. If you can say, hey, we are reorganizing the economy to fight a war to support our geopolitical interests, you're elevating the needs, the geopolitical interests of the state over the lives of the citizenry, over the literal ability to draw breath of the people that you send over to fight the wars, but also, you're transforming production. You're turning plows into swords, plowshares into swords, as they say. In the current context, since the end of World War II and the rise of the military-industrial congressional complex, there's an additional layer of, yes, the economy is permanently shifted to a war footing. So even if we're not actively fighting a war, even if we're just sending weapons and weapons and ammunition and advisors and other aid to Ukraine, for example, just the most recent example in a long list, it's still a war economy. It is elevating the needs of the state over the needs of the people. Pleopod writes, "There seems to me a whole group on the left now who seldom or never talk about class." Yep. They seem to have taken some of the progressive elements of the left-wing politics and aggressively accelerated them into a position where they have begun to lack logical consistency and can only be maintained via authoritarianism. Yep. Interesting and useful ideas that were once confined to university departments seem to have been embraced as facts by most major institutions. It's hard for me to wrap my head around where it's going and how we ended up here. Am I just getting old? Not just, but yes, you're older than you've ever been. And now you're even older. Am I just getting old? I think about how the 1960s flower power movement would have been viewed by the older generation and how it eventually burnt itself. However, its members were able to go on and accumulate capital and have a stake in the system, but this seems a pipe dream for many of the current youth. Yeah. I'd say that I'm taking in the audiobook now of Neil Howe's most recent book. The fourth turning is here. I'm only in chapter 1, so I'm not really in a position to talk about it yet, but expect a commentary referencing that book in the near future. And finally, Coolworks writes, as far as I can tell, the two types of leftists can be discerned by whether they support equality or equity. Okay, so yeah, equality means treating everybody equally. You have a universal ethic, a universal policy that treats everybody the same. And then, maybe in that context, individual efforts and, individual virtue will allow some people to do better than others. Or maybe, you take aggressive policies to, counterbalance the unevenness of the success of the few. Or maybe you don't. But equity, I don't really feel qualified to speak on this. It's a buzzword of the current left. I know it has a definition. I mean, I can ask the AI to define it. It will give me a definition. But in terms of, my ability to articulate it just on the fly, I'm not up for it. But yes, I do recognize it as a leftist buzzword, and definitely leftist of the psychological type, the ones who want to use institutional power to bully people and to coerce them. Not the leftism that is universal, in its leftism, in its appeal, in its, in the dispensing of its favors. Equity is not a child of that left. It is definitely of the left that Kaczynski was talking about. All right. Oh, good God, 23 minutes. I may put this up with no editing at all. We'll see. Talk to you soon.